Close the door, close the door.
We finally made it, guys. We made it to my generation. Oh boy, the 2000s. When old memes that we didn't even know would become memes until the future like this existed.
I couldn't have enough.
Now for the video game world, this was sort of a mixed emotion type of year. Some people are happy about the results, some people are not. I was not trying to reference this. So of course this was a huge year for Sony. The PS2 affected them so well, their stocks just exploded during the PS2 era. And for Sega, as you'll learn in a bit, actually had a pretty good build-up, but then it sort of just collapsed. But first, let's look at the console sales. The PS2 sold 155 million units, which if you do the math, you can almost combine the GameCube sales with the Dreamcast sales with the Xbox sales and times it by 3. The Xbox sold 24 million units, which I know doesn't seem like a lot, especially compared to the Xbox One now and especially the 360. But this is actually pretty good for a first console from a company. The GameCube sold around 21,700,000 units, which was sort of a red flag for Nintendo that this is not really good. Their sales have sort of been declining every single console, so things are getting a little bit scary. It's not like Nintendo lost money from this was still a pretty good sale, but things were getting a little bit weird. And the Dreamcast only sold 9.1 million units, which is sort of sad to see because this is not like a bad console. There's nothing like majorly wrong with it. So first, let's see the reason why. On day 1 of the PS2 launch, 500,000 units were sold. At the beginning though, there was a tiny lack of games. It was not like a huge issue, but at one point that sort of harmed the sales. Then there was a little bit of a supply issue, and this is where one console could have totally benefited but didn't really have the opportunity. It tried its best, and I'm pretty sure we know who I'm talking about. There was another issue called the Great Memory Card Famine. This was because demand was higher than supply, and if you don't know what that means, that's basically a NES Classic sort of situation where everyone wants this, you know, everyone's demanding it, but there's not enough supply. And because of this, Sony sort of lost a little bit of profit on their memory cards. Other companies benefited. And this next part may seem just insane to believe. I understand it 100%. So there's 3,874 game titles, right? Well, because there's over 155 million units sold, that means that there's about 1.5 billion copies of PS2 games that were sold. In around just a week, the Xbox shipped 600,000 units. And people may be asking, because this is a new console, why wouldn't people just let like other people experiment, like be the guinea pig? And I think it's because it's just Microsoft. Because they're already such a big brand and people love doing PC games, it sort of just made sense. That's probably a reason for why the Apple Pippin, which was an actual Apple console, just in case you didn't know, failed so badly. It made the Virtual Boy look good. That's not a joke. The Apple that we know today as the biggest company in the world, and that's not an exaggeration, had a terrible console. It was so terrible that it made the Virtual Boy sales look good. That is really sad. But believe it or not, before Microsoft was hooked on the idea of making the Xbox, they sort of wanted to team with Sony also. That's probably a huge irony. Clearly Sony doesn't regret their mistake like Nintendo did, but I think that Nintendo's sort of regretting their mistake 2 times. After seeing what happened with the Xbox, they were like, oh my god, are you fucking kidding me? Get it? Because if Nintendo actually teamed with Sony, then the Xbox wouldn't exist, and neither would the PlayStation. Also, just a small note, this was really good for America in the video game industry, because besides Atari and Sega, because yes, Sega was actually made in America. But anyways, this was a really big leap. This really brought back the American console. So thanks to Halo and other games, Microsoft did pretty well. And then there is the GameCube. The GameCube only sold 330,000 units on day 1. And it was a fairly okay Nintendo console, and there wasn't really anything majorly terrible with it. The only problem was with the discs. I know for GameCube owners like me, it feels a little bit awkward to see those tiny discs, and that wasn't the only issue with the discs. Because of the size, yeah. You couldn't really fit like powerful games. Of course nowadays that's like really hard not to do. You could literally fit a game like GTA 5 on a micro SD card, so that's not an issue, but back then you would probably not be able to fit Minecraft. I'm not even joking. But there still were some really good games, don't get me wrong. There was Smash Bros, Luigi's Mansion, Mario Sunshine, Mario Party, but there really wasn't anything that made the GameCube unique. And when we get to the features category, then I'll talk about that a little more. The Sega Dreamcast. On day one, the Dreamcast sold 200,000 units. Before the PS2, it was doing extremely well, building a huge audience of fans, and yeah, it was seen as just a huge success for Sega. Like basically the Dreamcast was like the Nintendo Switch at this time, like it was doing incredibly well. People really loved the little guy. And for some of you it may be shocking at what I'm saying because you're usually used to seeing the Dreamcast as a loser. But yeah, at first it was a champion, but then the PS2 nuclear bomb fell and destroyed everything. And that's not to make the PS2 look bad, it's an amazing console, but for Sega this was not a good thing, because the Dreamcast utterly failed after the PS2. And there are some pretty good reasons for why it failed. There were a lot of amazing features on the Dreamcast, and there was a lot of reasons that you should get a Dreamcast back in the day, but the PS2 just overshadowed all of that and just destroyed everything in its path. It's pretty obvious that it truly did hurt the Xbox sales and the GameCube sales as well. So the PS2 had some pretty interesting marketing. It had very, very eccentric and weird ads. If the PS2 was not selling well, I'm not really sure if these ads would really help, but there were a few that were like understandable, but the entire point of an ad is to explain the product. This sort of just feels like a reminder like, hey all of you PlayStation fans, there's a PS2. But there is one thing that is so loved, and it'll just bring you back. When you look at that logo, it just looks so great. And also in just a couple of seconds, I'm about to bring some people back to the nostalgia feeling. So yeah, nostalgia mode activate. Xbox, you know your commercials, there were some that also didn't make any sense, like this one. Life is short, play more games. I mean, it's sort of a, a little Doritos type of commercial, but yeah, there were some ads that also made sense. It was sort of balancing, but the presentation of the Xbox was also presented as well as the PS2. And I think that Microsoft itself sort of advertised it on its own because it's Microsoft, like I said earlier. And I think that's the same sort of situation with Sony, like, you don't really have to take the commercials seriously because you already have a little bit of your name in there. So it's like, oh, this is PlayStation. PS1 was good, so PS2 also probably is good. So clearly for Xbox customers, they weren't saying that. They were saying, oh, Microsoft has a console now. Let me find out more. Because they're already like known for what they do. And here is the Xbox's intro. But for the GameCube's marketing, with this commercial particularly, they did a pretty good job. I mean, it's a little bit of symbolism, a bunch of like games going on in this cube. Of course, because the GameCube didn't have like any major features where they could say, it's a DVD player and a game console in one or something like that, while still keeping that like non-cringy type of commercial where you talk about it, like you have characters playing along with the features, like you would see in like an Apple commercial or like a Samsung commercial, or like you would see in a Nintendo Switch commercial even. But
Why?
Nintendo did fairly well. Once again, this was a company that, yes, was failing, and that's why the name didn't really help it that much, because these were the dying days. This was basically the cliff where Nintendo just jumped off, and yeah, it just looks like a pit of falling down with Sega. Oh yeah, and here's some nostalgia for you. The Dreamcast commercials were more based on what the console can do, and that's really good. And I'm glad that Sega did that because this was the type of commercial they needed. There was no fooling around at this point. This was like a hit or miss, and unfortunately they missed. But I'm really glad that I'm not here sitting saying, why didn't they have any like informative commercials? And thankfully this is an informative commercial. But they also had a very interesting campaign, launching the system on 9999 and having the motto, this is also something that I really liked that Sega did. It was basically trying to say that the console is very advanced, and it actually was. These commercials are extremely better than the Sega Saturn, because if you saw my N64 versus Saturn versus PlayStation video, you would know that I sort of shat on the Saturn a lot, especially for marketing, but these commercials are much better. And of course, here is the Dreamcast startup. Now this is where things become a little bit more clear when you just fix your lens on your glasses and you see the full image. One of the things that made the PS2 so profitable is that it's a little bit of a hybrid. You can actually run Linux on a PS2. You can watch movies on a PS2, and the PS2 was very powerful. So because of all of these features, the PS2 just did amazing. Back in the day, movie players were like really expensive, and some were the same price as the PS2, but this is what attracted buyers. Due to the fact that it has more features like this, meaning if you wanted to get like an Xbox or a Dreamcast or a GameCube, but you also wanted a movie player, you'd have to buy them both, which would like be $500 or more. But it made sense just to pay $300 for something that could do the exact same job, but not just do it better, but do it in style. And because this is Sony and they're pretty popular for their movie players and CD players and all that stuff, so whoever thought of this idea, #genius. Now for the Xbox, it was a little bit more on the hardware side. This was basically for your speckies, as I like to call them, people who like the specs. Of course, there's no doubt that the PS2 was more powerful, but there was something that the PS2 didn't have, and that was surround sound, and it appears that people liked that. But in all seriousness, the Xbox didn't really have as many features as the PS2. The Xbox focused more on its Xbox Live, its new project, this online service of playing with other people. And of course, Halo was also a very big beneficial factor. Halo was basically the Breath of the Wild for the Xbox. This first-party game was so much fun for some players that it made the Xbox popular over time. This is where the Dreamcast did good. It may have not been popular, the sales may have not been good, but this is the beauty of the Dreamcast. So besides it having Windows CE, even though people didn't really use it, there's probably one big feature that I don't believe PlayStation or Xbox or Nintendo fans know about the Dreamcast that aren't really familiar with Sega, and that is that there's actually 2 consoles on the Dreamcast.
Find all 3 spoons inside specially marked Kellogg's cereal boxes and see Disney and Pixar's Toy Story 5.